Welcome to another episode of All About Trauma. On this episode of All About Trauma, we'll be talking to someone whose personal story and professional mission gives deep insight, compassion, and hope to a topic that is often shrouded in stigma and silence: self-injury. Amanda Beausoleil is the founder and executive director of Self-Injury Recovery and Awareness, or for in short, SIRA, a nonprofit that helps people recover from self-injury through a powerful peer support group model. After struggling with self-injury for 15 years, Amanda found healing and connection through a peer support group in New York, a turning point that ultimately led her to live a very successful career in fashion at iconic brands such as Saks, Fifth Avenue, Tory Burch, and Covertor. She launched SIRA in 2019 to break stigma, build community, and offer people a path to understanding, self-compassion, and recovery. Her journey from stigma, silence, and shame to advocacy and leadership is nothing short of inspiring. Amanda, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and for this conversation. Thank you. Many people don't get to hear a lot about self-injury, so it's a great time and conversation to open up about my journey and let people know what self-injury is.
Nicholas, how do you feel about this, our guest here?
Oh my God. I couldn't sleep the whole night almost last night. I'm so excited, Amanda. Um, if I reflect a little bit on the reason for that, on the one hand, it's because the topic we're going to talk about is it's so sensitive. It's such a sensitive thing and it's such a personal thing. And I just, in a way, a part of me is a little bit scared of asking the wrong questions and saying the wrong thing so there is that, but also of course there is the part of courage, I guess, on my side as well, and the curiosity and the desire to bring this out to the public, because as Renee has said very well, there is stigma around self-injury, as much as there's still stigma around suicide, sexual abuse, and other similar subjects, right? We've brought down the stigma of therapy and healing by so much, particularly in the USA, but there remains topics that we still need to tackle, and you're here for that. I know you're here for that. The other thing that I want to mention is that I came across your work because I had a client, a young client, who came to me and who was cutting her arms, and so I this was the first client I was confronted with this. So I went online and searched for things, and I came across your organization, and then I applied. I asked if I could join some of these groups as a therapist, and I was very kindly offered the opportunity to just be an observer. And it was like at 11 at night p.m. on a Saturday night, so that's usually my sacred weekend of non-work. But I did go for 3 times, and I was so impressed by the groups. I was so impressed by the groups, just how well structured they were, and they were. I would love to ask you some questions about how you came to make such a beautiful structure later on, and so I got to love the work that was being done, and I saw how empathic and cooperative and amicable and positive was all of it, the interactions there. And so that interest grew. And then I came across a little interview on YouTube about you. And then I came to a webinar, and through this sort of gradual exposure towards you, I grew more and more in love with your voice and your work. And by the time I watched the webinar of 1 hour, I really felt I could recognize something in me, in you, or you in me. And that is that I felt that you were somebody that had done the work. And you know what I mean by that. And a lot of people will know what I mean by that is when you have confronted your deepest pain and trauma, and you have had to come out of that and live with that and make peace with that, there is something that happens to the whole body and mind. And I could recognize that in you, and I was deeply attracted to discover your soul. So this is the reason why I'm here and why we have you here. And so, with with this long introduction being said, I want to remind, I want to say to the viewers here that Amanda has asked us to mention that she's not a licensed therapist, and that she's here speaking in her own voice from the point of view of her own personal experiences and from all the experiences she has gained through her work with SIRA. So that's just a disclaimer, and so now we want to give the voice to you, Amanda, asking you basically what is your story? What happened?
Yeah, well, first off, I gotta back up a bit. Your intro, I did not know all of that and that you came to so many meetings and the interview. So thank you so much. And like what a dedicated therapist also you are to your patient to have that dedication and to go to a meeting on your downtime on the weekends. So thank you so much for seeing the people like your clients who engage in self-injury, because a lot of healthcare professionals have stigmatized us. Not all, but we have encountered that, and I hear many stories. So thank you. I did not know your entire story of how you got to the webinar. So it's really amazing and extremely touching. So thank
Thank you. No, thank you
you.
to you. Yeah.
So a little bit about me and my story. So starting from the beginning, as you guys know, I'm from Texas. I love Texas. I'm a proud Texan. However, I live in New York now. I've lived in New York for 15 years. What brought me here was fashion, as that was my previous life. I went to fashion business school here and then worked for various magazines and fashion houses. But as far as childhood, from the outside, it looked pretty good, and I feel like I was living a double life, but I also feel like that's just childhood and being a teenager. We're all hiding and wearing a mask in some sort of way. And for me, I didn't learn self-injury from anyone. A lot of times people ask me, especially when I was younger, "Well, how did you learn about it? Who did you see engaging in it?" And I said, "Nobody," because that was the truth. I didn't know anybody actually engaged in self-injury. I didn't know the terminology. I honestly thought I made it up, and I thought I had found a loophole to emotion. So I actually thought I was like a genius for figuring this out and realizing, oh my gosh, I don't have to go to my parents. I don't have to go to an adult when I'm feeling sad or when I'm feeling depressed or hurt or when I need to cry. I don't have to quote unquote be a burden, because that's what I thought I would be when I was younger, if I had emotions and if I had needs, really. And so that's why I gravitated towards self-injury, and it didn't start with cutting, which was my form of self-injury. It started with just scratching my face, because one day I was crying. I was 10 years old when I first engaged, and I realized that pain regulated me, and it went from me being a 10 and extremely overwhelmed to me being more of like a 5 or a 4, and I thought, "Okay, I found something that works." I stopped crying, I felt regulated, and now I can go back into the world, put on my smile, and fake it. And soon after that, I gravitated towards cutting. And I realized, okay, this really works for me. Nobody engages in self-injury because just for, fun. There are benefits. People don't gravitate towards anything unless they're receiving some sort of benefit, even if it is maladaptive. So the benefits I was receiving from self-injury kept me alive, really, because I was suicidal. I had multiple suicide attempts by the time I was 17. I never used cutting as a form of attempting suicide, because for me, self-injury was sacred, and that was my coping mechanism in order to survive life. So when it comes to suicide, which I can get into a little bit more later, I always overdosed. I did not use self-injury, and like I mentioned, we can get into the differences and also the connections as well of self-injury and suicide. But fast forward into 17, 18, I was still cutting probably weekly, if not daily. And people knew, but I used the stigma to my advantage. I knew people wouldn't talk to me about it because they felt uncomfortable. So I'm not someone that usually like hid my scars. I was a cheerleader growing up, so I was always in a cheer uniform. So everyone could see my wounds, and I just knew no one would talk to me about it. The first person that did was my PCP, my pediatrician. And I wish I knew where she was today because I would love to thank her. She was the first person to call it out in a compassionate way, and she gave me a list of therapists, and she said, "Next time you come in," which was the following week, "you need to have a therapist picked out." And the way she handled it was just so beautifully done. She asked my mom and my sister to leave the room so she could talk to me privately. Um, and that's really started my therapy journey as a child, actually at 13. So I'm going to back up a bit at 13. And I just have her to thank really for being brave enough to talk to me about it and having compassion while doing it and getting me into therapy and starting my therapy journey. So that's the childhood of self-injury. I don't know if you want me to keep going or if you want to stop me and ask me any questions because I can be quite long-winded.
That's wonderful start. Renee, what have you got in your heart right?
Yeah, I'm just curious, like when you said your upbringing was seemed like pretty okay, like when it comes to just even how you grew up, it seems like you grew up in a basically well middle income family. Like for you, do you think there are other factors in your life and how you were noticed from your work and just from your work experience that probably made you susceptible for people who came from the background of that you came from to this kind of self-injury?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I'm from Katy, which is a town outside of Houston, and it's a safe suburb, and it kinda looks like Stepford Wives a bit, if you've ever seen that movie, Stepford Wives. Everything's perfectly lawned and a lot of golf courses. So I did have privilege in the sense that I had a safe environment as far as going to school and being able to walk, anywhere really in my town and having a good school to go to, a roof over my head, etcetera. My basic needs were met. Um However, I was one of very few Black people at the time. Now Katie's a lot more diverse, but when I was growing up in the '90s and early 2000s, that was not the case. So even though I felt like I belonged and I loved growing up in Katy, there was always a part of me that felt different because I was different. And I didn't know how to express that either. And I didn't know how to fully understand that as well as being a Black girl amongst all white people mostly and wanting to feel connected and part of community, which I did, but also knowing there's some things they're not gonna understand about me, and how do I navigate that? And I didn't know how to navigate that. But also that aside, I had a lot of trauma, and I also have struggle with mental illness. So there are a lot of extreme emotions going on with me at the time, and I did not know how to navigate that, and my parents weren't well equipped to help me with that, even though they did get me help when my PCP got me into therapy. Like my parents drove me to therapy. They got me into a psychiatrist, and I started my first antidepressant I got on. I was 12 or 13 years old. There are a lot of factors going on socially, but more so mentally, and I think that's where it stems from the most. And also my household and my parents were workaholics doing the best they could. I believe even when parents, aren't always there for you, they're doing the best they can with the knowledge and tools that they have. And that's exactly what my parents did. And with that, I was home alone a lot. My emotional needs weren't met and I'm having these extreme emotions. I'm having episodes. How do I manage that on my own and still go to school, look perfect, be a leader in my community, be captain of the cheer squad, be on a competitive cheer squad too. So I'm traveling the country. So there's a lot going on and I'm juggling a lot and I still want to be perfect, which is also a common denominator of self-injury perfectionism. I find that a lot and I see that a lot in people, including myself. And so I think all of those factors led up to me engaging in self-injury. It was a way for me to prove to myself that I was in pain because now I had the physical manifestation of the pain I was feeling internally. And it also gave me a way to connect with my body and at the same time disassociate with my body when I want to disassociate because every episode is different and the why behind every episode can be very different as well. And sometimes there's no reason at all, which people find really hard to understand and grasp. Sometimes people engage in self-injury for no reason once they're already well into the habit.
Huh?
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think even from what you're explaining, I'm just curious. It even ties in something else I wanted to touch on, and you just mentioned that for most people they hide their scars. You got to show them. I'm just curious how shame and maybe alienation, like you're one of the few Black people growing up at that time, did you feel alienated from everyone else? Number one, you're different. Number two, you have these scars that you're not hiding and no one talked to you about it. So do you think that there was some shame to it? That did you feel that many people are talking about it, but none of them really care to check out, hey, Amanda, I'm seeing there's some scars on you. Is everything okay? The fact that no one really reached out to check on you, and did it have some shame or as you're going through it?
Yeah, I didn't feel alienated in the sense that I didn't feel like I didn't belong. Always had a great group of friends, and like I mentioned, because I was so involved in cheer, and that's a very big deal in Texas, and we take it very seriously. I was always part of a community and a team. I always had great coaches that went beyond just being a coach. They were role models for me, and sometimes parents when my parents couldn't be there for me. A lot of the times I would go crying to my coach more than I would to my parents. Um, so in that sense, I did not feel alienated. As far as my internal pain, my mental illness struggle, um, cutting, yes, it was more so just isolating. Uh, but I purposely isolated myself because I didn't want to burden anyone, and I didn't want anyone to also make me stop engaging in self-injury. So, yes, there's always shame around self-injury, and I'm not, immune to that. I had a lot of shame around it. However, I also knew if no one talked to me about it, that means I didn't have to stop because no one's gonna try to stop me, and I didn't wanna stop. And that's the struggle that many people that engage in self-injury have to face. They have to face that tug of war of hating it and hating that they do it, but also loving it and not wanting to give it up. And that's where that relationship and understanding that relationship comes in.
Okay, thanks. Oh,
I'm curious about a couple of things. One is this thing that you said whereby you sort of haphazardly discover that scratching your face has a regulating effect. And I think I want to dive into that a little bit, maybe even invite our audience to mimic or imagine this simple action and seeing yourself crying and perhaps bringing your hands to the face, and maybe your nails are a little long and you're scratching your face like this. And let's do it together, Renee. Let's scratch our face. um, there is this, there is this.
mm,
Uh, it's a little painful, but I'm thinking if I am being overwhelmed by a mysterious sort of emotional process, like because oftentimes, even just before I was with a client, and he was describing how he's being overwhelmed with anger for his father because his father has been an alcoholic all his life, and he was violent before. He's not violent now, but he used to be, and so on. And it's like this emotion just overwhelms you, and it's like a force of nature, so we were comparing it to a wind on a sail. If you're in the middle of the ocean and just this gust of wind comes and it just takes you somewhere, and you need to know how to bring the sails down, right? And so in a way, perhaps, correct me please, Amanda, this is what I'm looking for, but in a way, like scratching the face here, or scratching yourself, or hurting your body, is bringing the sails down, is bringing that force of nature, channeling that force of nature into something that is more visible, touchable, controllable. Am I on the right track? My goal is to try to gain an empathic understanding of what was happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just I want to know I don't want to encourage anyone to mimic or engage in self-injury. And yes, pain and pleasure same area of the brain, right? And anyone can receive the benefits of self-injury. It's not that people that engage in self-injury tapped into this special um, mechanism where they can only feel the benefits and the emotion regulation. Technically, anybody can receive the benefits because the pain produces endorphins. So you're conditioning the brain to think it's something positive because it's working for you. So of course you're going to go back to the same thing that's working for you because the brain's going to say, "Oh, we want that again. That worked last time, but now we're going to need more." Because and that's where urges arise. Because you need more, because the brain's gonna say, "Okay, we need more endorphins. That felt good, but now we're getting used to it, so we need the habit to go even more." If that makes sense.
Mhm.
And
It's a
so
self-reinforcing mechanism, basically.
yes, thank you. I was like, I cannot find my words. Thank you. And so, yes, the pain relieves because you're conditioning the brain to think it's something positive. It is producing endorphins. It is providing a benefit. And something I talk to a lot in my meetings, more so my teen meetings. That's actually the only meeting I host now. We have 6 meetings a week, but I only host the teen meeting. I talk to them about that. I say, it's okay to acknowledge the benefits of self-injury. I think many times when you're working with other people, especially if they're not well versed in non-suicidal self-injury or NSSI, that's the technical term, um, they're just focused on the stopping the behavior. And of course, that's what we want. We don't want people hurting themselves. And nor does that person want to hurt themselves, really. But I also say, in order to stop and get to that point, you also have to understand why you're doing it and understand the benefits and understand that there's some love there because it did provide you the ability to live. So before you can get to the stopping, it's bad. All the words and the value laden words that people place around it, which I try to stay away from. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it just is. And you found something that works for you. Let's find a healthy tool that works for you now. So yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge the benefits, and pain does produce endorphins and it provides you benefits. So it's really hard to stop once you start because it works.
Yes, and if I can add to that, we should acknowledge the ease with which this tool can be discovered. Um, for example, I'm thinking I've always loved. I've been on a bicycle since I was 3. When I was 24, I literally cut my license with scissors, and I promised myself I wouldn't use a car anymore because I had understood the connection between oil, like petrol, and and wars and the killing of innocent people, right? And so I've been riding my bicycle ever since. I'm 50 now, so that's 25 years. And yet, if you take me up at a hill, and when my legs start to burn, I so hate it. I hate it. I hate that pain. But I have friends who love that pain, who when they feel that burn, just they get motivated to do more of it. So, and I know people that go to the gym and do that. And recently I was doing these boot camp things during the winter just to keep a little bit fit, and it's gruesome and tiresome and I hate it, but it's true that at the end I would come back and I feel like Superman, right? And so I want to invite everybody here to find in their own lives that frontier, that those small micro experiences all of us have had where that barrier between pain and pleasure exists. For example, in winter, say I come out of the shower and then I tap strongly my body, just to get the blood going and the heat going and so on. So that's painful, but that's also pleasurable. I It's just so available, so available. So that's what I wanted to reflect on. What does that bring to mind and heart for you when I say this?
Yeah, so it reminds me of the pain offset relief theory. And it basically talks about what makes somebody susceptible to self-injury. And there are once like 3 barriers of the 5 are broken, that's what makes someone susceptible to self-injury. And one of those barriers is, do you have a disdain for pain, or are you deterred by it, or does pain not really bother you. It doesn't disgust you or it doesn't turn you off. Maybe you have more curiosity towards it, or maybe you're like, oh, that pain weirdly feels good. What's going on there? Whereas someone like you're like, I do not want this pain. How does get this away? How do I get this feeling off my body?
Right.
um,
But it's
and
a
that's
spectrum then.
yeah, and that's one of the barriers. So it's not necessarily that people that engage in self-injury love pain. I mean, some might, and I can't talk for everybody. Um, but for me, I don't love pain. Even now, if I like stub my toe or something, I'm like, oh God, like ow, like no. So even when I was engaging in self-injury, I didn't love pain. It was just worth going through the pain to feel the relief after. People don't go towards self-injury because of the pain, they go towards it because of the relief they feel after the pain. They're just not pain doesn't deter them from self-injury. So that spectrum and where you land on that is one of the things that can make you susceptible to self-injury, along
It's a
with
bargain, basically, that you're making with life, with yourself. Mhm.
exactly, that's one way to put it, a great way to put it. I've never thought about it like that, a bargain. But yeah, it's simply, I didn't care that there was pain. And then you get used to the pain. So it doesn't even bother you anymore. You still feel it, of course, but it doesn't bother you. You're like, I have to get through this. And eventually sometimes people do like it. And there are times that I did like it, other times I didn't. I just knew getting to the other side of the mountain, so to speak, was the relief I was looking for. So anything was worth it to get to that relief because I'm in so much pain.
And Amanda, you mentioned before, and this leads me to the second point that I was curious about. You mentioned before that um, you wanted to release this pain, and there is a sense that this pain is hidden in some earlier years of your life, and even now, right? You say what I was mostly looking for is the relief, not the pain, and you were also saying being a burden. This you've come up with this sentence a few times, so it's almost like, am I understanding you well? It's like the pain of possibly burdening someone with your emotions, like the imagined suffering of the other person. So that's an empathic reaction, isn't it? It's like, I want to tell my mom that I was hit at school, or that I'm sad that little Jack doesn't like me anymore, or told me I'm black and whatever, I'm stupid. But I cannot because my mother will suffer. Right? That's kind of an empathic projection of someone who's very sensitive about the possibility of somebody else suffering. And here you are trying to defend them to the point where you accept that you will cut yourself instead of doing that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I am a very empathetic person, and I have found that many people, but now empathetic person, and I have found through my work with SIRA and listening to and going to peer support groups for self injury for 11 years now. Time flies. Um, People that engage in self-injury more times than not are incredibly empathetic people. They just can give that empathy to everybody except themselves. A lot of times I find that they're caretakers, they're teachers, they're healthcare professionals. They're the people helping the world, really. They just don't know how to give that love to themselves. Self-compassion is something that's really hard for people that engage in self-injury. For instance, I find in meetings, the hardest part of a meeting for other people is to say our affirmations. That's the hardest part. It's not sharing necessarily, even though that's very hard too. But it's not the sharing. It's not listening to other people and making sure you're not triggered. It's saying something nice about yourself. And I actually had to move up the affirmations in our deck. As you mentioned, it is a structured meeting, and there's a deck that every host reads once they go through training. And I moved up the affirmations in the deck because people would log off of the meeting early because the affirmations were at the end because they didn't want to say something nice about themselves. So I moved it up so people would have to say something nice about themselves. And I always say, it doesn't even matter if you believe it right now, just start with saying it. So yes, I find that people that engage in self-injury are incredibly empathetic. They're very sensitive in a good way. I feel like people think of sensitivity as a negative, but I think it's a superpower. I think being empathetic is a superpower, and being perceptive is a superpower. And they're really all one. It's just when you're feeling all of that overstimulation, you're feeling it from others, and you're having to deal with yourself too. How do you regulate that? Because if no one's helping you navigate that, that's a lot to handle, and that's incredibly overwhelming. And we find that, and I say we when I meaning when I talk to researchers or NSSI experts, doctors, etc., they find that adolescents that are engaging in self-injury are incredibly perceptive. So they're noticing and seeing everything. That's a lot to take in for anyone, let alone a child. So that is a commonality I have found over the years when it comes to people engaging in self-injury.
So could we term that as another vulnerability, let's say in um mhm.
Y Yeah, I think, it could make someone susceptible. I don't think if you're empathetic, then, you're gonna start self-injuring. I just think that it's a commonality because they can notice and they can feel very deeply, and if they don't know how to regulate, if they don't have the right support, if there are other factors going on like mental illness or mental health struggles, lots of trauma, abuse in family, that's even adding more to their plate. And not to say someone that engages in self-injury automatically just has, an overload of trauma or has a mental illness. Even though many people do, it's not always the case. So I don't want to put a blanket statement on it. And I have met people who felt actually more guilty for engaging in self-injury because they don't have a mental illness. And I mean, I think everybody has trauma, it's just part of the human experience, but they would say, I wasn't abused or I was fed, I wasn't homeless or the extremes that people count as trauma when really trauma is anything, and a lot of times it's the little things that add up that we don't notice, and that's part of our everyday life that ends up being the biggest trauma, because it's so ingrained in us instead of, like, the massive moments that everyone, thinks about. So I just wanna put that out there that you don't necessarily have to have a mental illness or have this, you know, crazy, insane, story of trauma, and I don't mean to say crazy, insane in that way, just an amplified story of trauma, um, because if you find that self-injury works for you, then it works for you, and now let's help you separate from self-injury. So yeah, I just wanna, like, make that distinction.
But is there a way that you can engage with self-injury? You said it before, people don't engage in self-injury for pleasure. So is there a way that somebody is engaging in self-injury without having a traumatic pain they want to relieve? Like it seems to me almost a logical conclusion that if you're engaging with self-injury, you have to have enough developmental trauma, pain within you to want to relieve and make that bargain that we were saying before, right? So what's perhaps less clear to a lot of people is first of all how neglect operates, because neglect is a lot more a hidden force in the normal of family life. You can say my parents loved me, provided for me, and still come out with a sense of emptiness, with a sense of disconnection, with a sense that you don't matter, um, with a sense that you were not really loved, that no matter what you did, it was never really enough to match the success that your mother or your father were having at work or in their business together, or right.
Yeah. To go back to the first part of what you said, yes, people that engage in self-injury, I have found majority of them are dealing with a lot mentally and emotionally and childhood trauma. I just didn't want to leave out the people that might not um resonate as much with those stories because I have met those people too, and I don't wanna leave anybody out of the equation. But more times than not, I most people in our community are going through a lot of mental health issues and struggles and dealing with a lot of emotional, issues that stem from childhood. But again, I don't wanna put it like a blanketed stable statement.
No,
Yeah.
sure. I think what I'm hearing from you is that you don't have to have a stereotypical story of trauma to engage in self-injury. That we are beginning to understand together. One, because this pain pleasure boundary frontier is very accessible to all of us. Another, because a lot of us are very sensitive, but we're not given a place for that sensitive. Third, because neglect operates very much in the shadows of things. And so if you're very sensitive and you feel there is no real space for you in the family, you're going to be quiet and not burden anybody. And to keep that normalcy sacred and protected, that's what the child is there to do, to keep things balanced and equilibrated, right? To the extent that we will, for example, let's say a couple is having tensions in between them, but they don't want to explore those tensions, those fights. Suddenly, the two siblings are fighting for no reason continually because they need to express that tension and they don't want their parents having that tension, because they have that tension, then the two parents will separate and that's the end of the family, right? So children will counterbalance whatever the parents are sort of not providing in a way for the system to stay together. If we follow this reasoning, I want to go back to a place in your life where you began to feel all these things, all this pain all around you without knowing, and you convince yourself that you shouldn't bring them back out. So you were absorbing like a sponge, but something told you that you should not talk about it, that there was no place for you to connect about that pain with somebody. What happened there?
Yeah, I was definitely a parentified child, for sure. Um, I grew up too quickly, and I really, in many ways, had to like parent myself and just become an adult. And if I wanted something done, I knew I had to do it myself. For instance, getting my driver's license, like I forged my parents' signature because I knew that I just needed to get this done and I probably wouldn't see them. So let me just, do what I need to do so I can get my driver's license. And college, I found the colleges. I went to pre-college programs and I applied myself. I didn't have any help from my parents. So yes, I was very independent, and hyper independence is, a trauma response. So yes, the parentified child in me definitely used self-injury as a tool to keep being my own parent. And I wouldn't say I didn't feel loved. I knew my parents loved me and they were still involved in my life. For instance, my dad drove me to pretty much every cheer competition, and at the time, now there are a lot of dads like part of cheerleading world, but at the time he was literally the only dad at every cheer competition, to the point that they made him like an honorary coach. So he would have him press the play button for the music at every competition, so he like felt a part of it. So they were still a part of my life and involved in my extracurriculars. However, when it came to emotional needs, and because I did work a lot, I was at home by myself a lot, and my sister's older than me. So by the time she went to college, I was 14. So I lived alone most of my teenage years because my parents were divorced at that point. So I did have to, fend for myself in certain ways. And if I wanted to succeed, whether it was in school or cheer or getting into college, etc., I knew I can't rely on anybody. If I want this done and if I want to succeed, then it's only up to me. So in that way, cutting was a way for me to take away some of that pressure, to express my emotions, to disassociate, kind of any emotion I needed. Cutting could fill that gap for me.
Would it be appropriate for us to stack more or less when you're 6 years old and to understand what is the sort of racial, ethnicity, sort of discriminatory context in which you're living, and whether that applies to your parents, and whether you're beginning to sense all this racial pain that you have inherited intergenerationally? Is it appropriate in the context of your blackness and your parents' blackness? Are your parents one black and one white, or they're both?
So my parents are Trinidadian. My dad's Indian, so he's from the Indian side, and my mom's Black, but also has German. We have a lot going on um, in our gene pool. But my dad's side of the family is Indian. Like my grandma was Hindu, and I only really knew my Indian side of the family, actually. I never really spoke to the Black side of my family, which is my mom's side. So even though, yes, I identify as Black, I look Black, inside the house, I connected more with West Indian culture. For instance, when kids would come to my house, when I was in junior high, they asked me, "Why don't you have Kool-Aid?" or "Why don't you have fried chicken?" And I honestly didn't know African American stereotypes because my parents are immigrants and were born in Trinidad. And so I had to ask my mom, "Mom, why are they asking me if we have Kool-Aid and fried chicken?" And she was like, "Honey, that's because, like, African Americans, like, they're stereotyping." And she was like, "But we're West Indian." So I was like, "I can give you curry chicken. I can give you roti, but I don't have those." So I was actually learning stereotypes from the white kids at school, and I'd have to go home and ask my mom, "Why are they asking me this? Or why do they think we would have this?" And my dad looks fully Indian, so I realized I never actually had, like, a Black man or African American man in the household until my mom started dating, and her first boyfriend, who was African American, came in, and I was like, "Wow, I've never actually." I that was a moment I realized, I was like, "I've never had a Black man, a Black adult in the house." Like, my friends, like, my guy friends, yes, but not, like, an adult, since my dad is Indian. So that mix was confusing because also my Indian side of my family was racist towards me because they always said, "You look like your mom, like, you look Black," and I was like, "Well, I am Black, so I don't know what you want me to do about it." And then with my friends asking me, like, these stereotypes that I didn't understand because I wasn't raised that way. So I'm dealing with a lot of different cultures, and all of them are asking me or saying racist things towards me, but I didn't know they were racist. And so because I didn't know those things were racist until I got older, I have that, and just, growing up in the way I grew up, I do have a lot of internal racism wounds that I'm working on as an adult because I did have to realize, oh, certain things that happened, certain things people said, like, I have this internal racism wound that I need to heal, and I need to heal for my younger selves as well. I didn't know when boys said you're pretty for a Black girl. I did not know that was racist. I knew it didn't feel good, but I didn't know how to digest that, and I didn't know how to react, and I didn't know if I was allowed to be angry. I think many times they just want you to be, the quiet Black person, especially if you're a woman, and, smile and be quiet. And so that's usually what I did. I just smiled or I didn't say anything. So dealing with those things and unpacking that. Yeah, I think at the time I did not understand how that impacted me, because I just didn't understand and no one was talking me through it. So I'm sure, like, yes, it probably contributed to my self injury because it made me isolated in certain ways, even though I was part of my community. I was very engaged in my community, and I love the community I grew up in. But those certain things, yes, it makes it's in your face that you're different. But then also the Black kids that were in my community didn't accept me, and they were racist towards me because they're like, "Well, you don't sound Black, and um, you don't do the same things that we do, or you like are hanging out with the white kids more." But at the same time, like, these are the kids I've known since I was 5 years old. So these are my friends. And there was one time where the white kids were defending me to the Black kids because the Black kids were making fun of me. And I just remember sitting back, and I was in high school, and I was like, this is really strange that the white kids are telling the Black kids not to be racist towards me. And I was just like, I don't think this is normal. And even if it is, I've never seen it before. So I think there's a lot of unpack there. And it's something that I've been unpacking as an adult in therapy and realizing how that has impacted me and my self esteem and my inner critic.
What you're saying reminds me of this book that I've got just in front of me, because this is like bread and butter for my work. I mostly Do you know this book? Yeah.
Do you know?
You don't. Oh my God, you don't. Well, you have to read this. You have to read. It's the Bible for people like you who have multiple cultural identity. And it's the bread and butter for my work because I deal mostly with people who were brought up by parents from two different cultures. I was brought up from an Italian and a father and Belgian mother, and was born in Morocco and lived my first 7 years of my life in Morocco. And in this book, you will discover precisely what you were talking about, this sense of invisibility from all sides. Like, no matter where you place your identity, you're always invisible to some other group. No matter where you try to be inside, you always end up being an outsider to another part of yourself. And it's just like a conundrum and a complexity that is very difficult to resolve, and that as a child you cannot resolve, because we're just not mentally and emotionally prepared to process that complexity. And so, in a sense, to me now, it makes a lot of sense that even if you had a relatively very good and caring family, which in this case, obviously was not completely the case, because your parents also went through an adverse sort of experience for you, which is the divorce, right? So things got even more complex with that. But even if you had, and in this book you will find out about that, even if you had a very caring family, with that level of complexity, that you would have still have struggled. And so it makes sense to me that you arrive in adolescence and you're trying to decomplexify this complexity. You're trying to reduce this complexity to something manageable, to something that you can touch. So it's amazing that you haven't come across this yet, right? It shows how complex your story is, and how important it is for you to acknowledge all this part of you, and why you had that slip of the tongue just at the beginning of this interview, right? We people, you said, or something like, right? We made a bit of a joke. It's true. There are several people inside you. So thank you. I feel very satisfied now. I kind of have a sense of what you are seeking. I have a sense of what you are seeking. You are seeking simplicity in a big world of complexity at some level. That's at least one answer that I
Yeah.
had that satisfies me.
I think I was seeking stability and control. I really wanted stability. My household didn't feel stable. So I think I wanted stability and comfort, safety and control, and that's
Right.
what self-injury gave to me at the time.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Renee, yeah.
Actually, one stage to go back to something you said before about the groups, and I found it so interesting when you said that affirmations was a big thing among the groups, and I just want to know, how do groups facilitate in the process of actually recovery when it comes to affirmations? Would you say that your experience is that some members of the group maybe confided into you that they have never said affirmations before that particular exercise as a group? And would you say that the fact that it was that as a group helped other people who are very against it, who are the first ones to log off? Maybe others who stayed on said, hey, by the way, next time, it's not really that bad. You could just have it a shot, and more people got to warm up to the idea. So how was this group setup really facilitating people's openness to different new concepts of affirmations and the like? What did you notice?
Yeah, I don't know if people told fellow SIRA members, it's not that bad, come back. I don't know the, side conversations or anything like that. But I think seeing other people, and I know for me that really helps me in peer support groups, seeing other people's journey, especially the ones that were further along than me, gave me confidence, gave me hope, and realized that I had the ability to do the same. So I think in our peer support groups, and just peer support group in general, that community, that bond, and being able to have those role models, so to speak, that have similar journeys to you and, similar struggles, um, gives you confidence and hope. And you're like, okay, let me watch that. Maybe some things they do I can mimic because it might work for me too. And I think that's what people take away, and I hope they take away. One of the things they take away from our SIRA meetings is being able to see people's growth so they can also see their own growth as well, and continue to grow and evolve. And I always tell people, be curious. It's not about finding necessarily the right coping mechanism for you. It's about having a diverse toolbox of coping skills, and it's about being curious. It's not going to give you the instant gratification that self-injury gives you. So you got to throw that out the window. Unfortunately, the healthy things don't give you the instant gratification. I wish I could go to the gym and lose 20 pounds just going to the gym once, but that's not how it works. You got to keep going. And it's the same thing with self-injury. You gotta just, it's repetition. And I think when it comes to the affirmations or really anything with coming to our meetings, it's repetition. It's going even when you don't wanna go, and even when you think you're quote unquote better. Maintenance then. If you don't feel like you need to go weekly, okay, well then I would say you're be in the maintenance phase, but be curious in the fact that maybe I still need this as part of my maintenance journey. Maybe it's not even monthly, maybe it's quarterly, but being curious about your healing process and being adaptable. Um, so you can change up your coping skills, I think is really, really important. Moving from that fixed thinking to flexible thinking. I'm someone that has very fixed thinking, and I find that many people in SIRA have very fixed thinking. So that's why I always say be curious, be adaptable when you're on your healing journey. Because as you evolve, what you need and the tools you need to heal are going to evolve with you, as they should. So that's what I see in SIRA, and with the affirmations, I hope once they see other people doing it, it gives them courage to do it as well, even if they don't believe it in the beginning.
I think maybe even let me just follow up on what you just said. Are there some fundamental tools that are best to start off from? Maybe the one that you started off from when you got into a peer support group. Are there certain fundamental tools that could be maybe some interventions from the very beginning that maybe could help just to start off to ease into their own recovery journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the basics were one, talking about it. When I went to my first peer support meeting, I realized I had never said the words out loud. I had been engaging in self injury at that point for uh 10, 11 plus years, and I had actually never said the word self-injury or cutting or self-harm out loud. And I didn't realize that until I went to the peer support group and had to say it. And I was like, wow, I've been doing this for so long. It's been such an intimate experience and journey for me, but yeah, I haven't uttered the words. So talking about it, because that chips away at the stigma and isolation. Self-injury is incredibly isolating. And I say the antidote to this isolating behavior is connection. So connecting with others and connecting with yourself. I also think understanding what self-injury is really important. Once I understood the basics of non-suicidal self-injury, it really helped me understand my brain and how I was going about things. Also, that's just when I deal with anything, and especially my mental illness journey, like, I like to know the science of it, because once I know the science, I can understand my patterns and I can understand why I'm gravitating towards certain things. So that's just how I like to learn. But I do think, teaching our community, and I try to do that and have experts come in as well, teaching about self-injury. So understanding the basics. Every meeting, we start with the definition. So the definition of non-suicidal self-injury is the deliberate self-directed damage of body tissue without suicidal intent, meaning it always goes back to intent. You're purposely damaging your body immediately, and you know that it's going to cause pain. When people aren't sure if they're engaged, if what they're doing constitutes as self-injury, I always ask them, well, what was your intent? So non-suicidal self-injury always goes back to intent, and it's always immediate damage to body tissue. Um, and even though many people, as a misconception, think when people are engaging in self-injury, they're trying to end their life, it's not, which is why the technical term is non-suicidal self-injury. They're actually going to great lengths to stay alive. Even though that it is different from suicide, there is a high correlation between people that engage in self-injury and people that have suicidal ideation, attempt, or complete suicide. But it's an important distinction to note. So I think the basics, yeah, really start with that. Understanding what self injury is, because it helps you understand the why, and talking and connecting, take away the isolation and take away the shame. And you do that by just chipping away very slowly at it. It's not going to be like a sledgehammer. It might feel like it, but I think it's the chipping away that really helps in um, makes it a lifelong journey of healing. Because I mean, in general, we're always healing. We're never I don't like when people say, "I'm healed," past tense. We're living the human experience, and the human experience is literally just learning lessons. So and life is difficult and, it's meant to be, not 24/7, but it is meant to be difficult in certain aspects. So we're always learning lessons, we're always healing, we're having a human experience.
Going into even more into the interventions, when you talked about talking and just sharing, what would the best way, maybe if as a friend, maybe for some of the people in our audience might be feeling that there's someone that they may know who possibly is undertaking self-harm and they need help. What is the best way of maybe intervening? Is there a way as a friend I can intervene? Maybe I'm watching this and I'm like, oh wow, I know someone who did what Amanda was doing. Should I get to talk to them that, by the way, you can get help? Or will they feel like um very defensive? How does maybe a friendly intervention come about?
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then I'll also go into if you are engaging in self-injury, how to start that conversation with someone if you're ready. As far as friends and loved ones, there's no, like, one size fits all, right, approach. However, 1, it depends on the relationship you have with the person. 2, I would say make sure you are in a quiet space, you're not in public, so it's an intimate conversation. It's gonna be uncomfortable for both parties no matter what. I think it's about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And also just telling them, I think, "Hey, I would love to hear your story," or if you ever need me or need a listening ear, I'm here. I don't think it necessarily needs to be so direct. Again, depends on the relationship, but I don't think it always needs to be so direct as, you know, I see you're cutting, or I see you're burning, or I see you're pulling your hair, because that might put someone on the defense, especially if they're not ready for that moment. And you don't want to quote unquote out them when they're not ready. You don't want to take that moment away from them. That's their moment to have and their moment to share. But I think doing it more generally as I'm here for you, you can call me. I think that's a really important one because people that engage in self-injury, when they have urges, even like, and I find a lot of urges happen at nighttime, telling someone, "Hey, if you have, like, a call list or want to start one, like, please put me on your call list. I am here for you. You are not a burden. I want to listen." I think it's more about listening and knowing that they have support and that you're their quote unquote cheerleader. And it's not about getting them to stop necessarily or having them to divulge everything. It's more so saying, "Hey, I am on this journey with you if you would like me to be, and we're gonna go at your pace, not the pace I want to be at." So I think that's a great way to approach it, because self-injury is not an identity, even if people, and I myself was guilty of that too, thinking that their self-injury is their identity. So when you do talk to them about it, you don't want to make it necessarily solely about the self-injury because there's a bigger picture. And it's about understanding the person and being there for the person so then you can get to the self-injury. Um, and then if you do have the relationship where you can be the direct and you think it might go well, then sure, be direct. I know that wouldn't have worked for me as a child or even in college or as a young adult. Even though my pediatrician was direct with me, but I think again, it's the relationship difference. It's my doctor and she's noticing something on my body. It's very a different dynamic. So again, I think it also depends on the dynamic of the relationship as well. But I think just letting them know that you're there for them and that they can call you and that you can hold space. Even saying something like that, like I can hold space for you if you need that, if you want that, I'm ready to hold space. I think is really important. And then on the flip side, someone that's engaging in self-injury and is ready to tell someone. I think Cornell Self-Injury Recovery and Resources Research Center and website is great. They have a template called the 5 W's, so who, what, when, where, why, and it helps you plan out how to start that conversation with someone, thinking about who do I want to talk to? Why am I choosing that person? When is a good time? Where should that conversation happen? And what do I want to say? I always encourage people to kind of like write a script, whether they want to write it down physically or on their computer, or if they just want to go through it in their head, can be really helpful and relieve some of that anxiety. Sometimes we like recommend, and Cornell also recommends sitting in a car so you don't have to be face to face with the person, and that actually might be more helpful having that conversation in a car so you don't have to have that direct eye contact if that's too much. So if you are someone engaging in self-injury, I think that's a great resource to look up to prepare for that conversation. Um, and really understanding why you want to tell this person, and are they someone you can confide in, and how much do you want to tell them? And even saying, "This is what I wanna tell you, and I don't have the answers, I don't know why," is really important. A lot of times, people who are on the other side receiving this information will ask a lot of questions, and I have found therapists will ask people a lot of questions too when I listen to our teens and SIRA members, and they don't have the answers. They're like, "I don't know why I do this. I don't know enough about self-injury. I don't have the answers." So now you're adding more to their plate. They just divulged all this information, and now they have to teach. And I would say it's really important not to do that to them, and also the person engaging in self-injury to know that it's okay to say, "I don't have the answers." "I don't know" is an answer. So those are the 2 sides, I think, of a good way to approach it.
Great. You mentioned before that the self injury was something sacred to you, and then you mentioned recently also that um, you don't want to take this moment out of them. So there is a sense that they own something there. And you also said this is not an identity. So what does the personal self injuries own that we need to respect?
Yeah, I realized for me, my first intimate relationship wasn't with a person, it was with self-injury because I started so young. And it was something I relied on. And I knew it was something that was always there for me that can never let me down, even though it was wrapped up in shame and secrecy and isolation. And so when I was starting my healing journey, I was so focused on stopping just because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. That's what everyone's telling me. And I realized that doesn't work for me. I actually had to write a breakup letter to my self-injury, which is actually part of SIRA's literature, Layers to Discovery now. Um, it's either you can write an apology letter to yourself or a breakup letter. So I wrote a breakup letter to myself, or to my self-injury rather, because I had to thank it for what it did for me. It kept me alive. And then I had to say, it's time to let go of this. By doing that, I started to slowly but surely create space between me and self-injury. And by creating that space, it allowed me to realize that self-injury wasn't my identity. It was something I engaged in, but it's not who I am. Whereas before I started that process, if someone asked me, "What's the number one thing I need to know about you?" I wouldn't have told the truth, but in my head, I would have thought, "I'm a cutter. That's the number one thing you need to know about me," because I identified so deeply with it. And even that language is really important. You'll find in our literature, and when I talk and in our meetings, we always say I engage in, not I am. Again, it's separating that identity. So, yeah, for me, understanding the relationship, acknowledging the relationship, and respecting it and thanking it instead of focusing on, like, "It's bad, don't do it," but saying, "Hey, I I loved you. You gave me a lot of benefits. You helped me survive. Thank you, but I don't want you anymore. I don't want you in my life anymore. I want to treat myself better. I wanna have respect and love and compassion for myself. So thank you, but no thank you." Um, Separating that and creating that breakup, so to speak, was really important and really the beginning of my healing journey. So yeah, I think that's really important for people in their healing journey to understand what that relationship means to them and what it looks like and how they talk to it. For me, it was really important to talk to my self-injury, and show compassion towards it because then I could show compassion towards myself.
Amanda, is very curious the way that you talk about this relationship. I love the insight of thinking about this as a relationship. But I also remember at the beginning you were saying that this scratching your face was regulating you. So this is a relationship, there's love involved, there are benefits involved, and it regulates you. And I think, isn't this the definition of a parent?
Yeah, it is. I love
You
that.
know, like the parents should do all those things. So in a
Yeah,
way, you had
it's a great
found a
vision
way to
for us to
recuperate. Say that again.
I said acceptance shouldn't be wrapped in shame and pain and hurt, but yes, essentially what I was looking for is what one would want and really need from parents.
And so I'm wondering if I'm wondering how old you were when you began to break up, when you broke up with this relationship, and whether there is like a developmental sort of difficulty for younger self-cutters or self-injurers, um, because it's still so hard to even imagine the possibility of breaking up with a parent. At some level, we perhaps go to the self-injury because we can't admit to ourselves that our parent cannot be parents for us, and we should break up and just take care of ourselves and sort of forget about them. We can't do that as adolescents, as children. We just can't.
Mhm.
It's so painful to even consider that possibility. So now we get the self-injury to reestablish that connection of strength. So I'm thinking it's going to be very hard when you're 13, 14, 15, 16 to break away from that. Do you see people being able to break up with their self-injury at that early young age?
I do. I do.
Exactly.
And also I see the connections you're making with parents and, what parents should provide, and I see that and understand that, and agree with it to a degree. And also, yes, self-injury is self-soothing. And I do see teens start breaking away from their self-injury. And granted, some people self-injury can be a phase, and whereas other people it can be a lifelong journey. Majority of the people in SIRA are adults. Even though majority of research and majority of conversations around self-injury are all around adolescence. Even though, yes, it usually starts at adolescence. I know some adults, however, that started as an adult. But I always say the adolescent grows up. So if they weren't taught the healthy coping skills, then they're gonna take what they know with them into adulthood. Uh, However, like, the stats for self-injury, especially with adolescents, is staggering. 17 to 25% of adolescents, report engaging in self-injury at least once in their lifetime, and 13 to up to, like, 23% of young adults, and then about 5 to 8% of adults engage in self-injury. And even though those numbers are really high, some researchers think it's actually even higher. It's just that people don't report it because of the stigma, and a lot of people think women engage in self-injury more than men, when research has shown it's pretty much split down the middle, maybe 1 to 2% more women, or they find that it's split down the middle. The difference is that women come forward more than men, again, because of stigma.
Make sense developmentally, in the sense that you would expect that relationship to begin in adolescence, because that's when the child needs the parent the most. That's when you look the model and the thing to look up to, to know how to behave in the world, right?
Mhm.
So you begin that relationship in adolescence, and then it continues all the way up to young adulthood, 22, 23, 24, 25, when your brain has fully matured. And only then can you begin to process the idea of separating from your parents, like literally from your physical parents, but also from the sort of inward psychological model of parenthood that you have nurtured with the self-injury. So yeah, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I started my breaking up or in healing journey around,
Mm.
I think I was 22 is when I started. 22 or 23 is when I started. But like I said, I love our teen groups. I love hosting our teen groups. They're so impressive and wise and insightful. I learn from them, and I do see them slowly breaking away. So I wouldn't say, yes, of course I can't find the brains developed, but I wouldn't say you would, like, until then you have to wait to start healing. I see teens breaking away and understanding the process and understanding their relationship, and wanting to stop, which is, the number one thing. Do you want to? And yes, and figuring out how to navigate that and being really insightful as they navigate that and finding great tools for them to heal. I always love hearing their coping skills, and like they'll give advice to the other teens, like try this coping skill or this works for me. And I'm just like, wow, I was not doing that at your age. So impressive. And yes, the stats are higher for adolescents engaging in self-injury, but the stats for young adults and adults are still really high. Especially that it's not highly reported for the numbers to be that high still. Is quite alarming, which is why it's important to talk about this and to raise awareness so people know that they're not alone and that they can receive help and nothing's wrong with them. They're just trying to figure out life like we all are. Um, and like I mentioned, most of the people in our meetings are adults. We have people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Hey, Amanda, we have really stretched your intelligence, wisdom, patience, generosity a bit further than we expected. Would you mind telling us what SIRA offers and how people can reach you and what is the best way to get in touch with this organization and so on? And then we can say the goodbyes.
Yeah, absolutely. So SIRA, our bread and butter and our North Star will always be peer support. So we have 6 peer support groups online via Zoom weekly. One is for ages 30 and up. The others, 4 of them, are for ages 16 and up, 1 teen, like I mentioned, so 12 to 19. And then we have a journaling meeting, which is based off our literature, Layers to Discovery. So if you would like to come to a meeting, you can go to thesira.org, and you can fill out our form, so our screening form, and then someone will email you back and send you the Zoom link. So if you would like to start or go to peer support groups, that's how you would do that. As far as how we are expanding, because we are expanding. Now we are focusing on our education leg. So I actually just hired a researcher not too long ago from Penn State, and we are building a recovery course that hopefully we will be able to partner with various foundations and mental health facilities. So we're really excited about that and opening up our education wing of self-injury. It's a recovery course I've been working on for years, and I've just been terrified to put my work out there. But now that I have a researcher and we're about to hire another, like an assistant researcher in beta testing, I'm really excited about it. And so that's the education leg of SIRA and where we're going and what we're focusing on this year. And then also, I give talks, I give workshops to healthcare professionals. I like to say I teach compassion through science. Once they understand how self-injury affects the brain, they start seeing their patients as human. So I fuse my lived experience with evidence-based research. So those are pretty much the 3 legs of SIRA. And as I mentioned, this year we're really focusing on the education wing of SIRA and building out that program.
Wow, amazing, brilliant, superb, nice. The congratulations, and yeah, again, feeling very privileged to have met you and to have brought you to the show. Renee.
Yeah. It's been a very enlightening and insightful talk. Thank you, Amanda, and I hope any of our viewers will get in touch with you and really get to use all the insight you've got to share with us. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was such a beautiful and compassionate conversation. So thank you for giving me the space, giving SIRA the space, and thank you for your brilliant questions and thoughtful questions. And Nicholas, thank you for finding me and going to SIRA and reaching out. Your story is amazing. I did not know all that. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. And this is what makes the work even more worthwhile when I get to meet brilliant, compassionate people like you both. So thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, blessing on all of our viewers and you, Renee, and you, Amanda, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.